Well, we did conduct some research and looked into all the cases that we could determine where this confidential informant was involved. We've only uncovered one, and we're looking into the relief that that person would be entitled to. So the good news is this problem doesn't appear to be rampant, but we did cover at least one other case where he was involved.
So that would be outside of the one where the three were arrested, and then the original person who kind of was able to provide text messages that uncovered what was going on. There is a third case. That would be the third case then?
Right, and so it's important for you to have the background about how this happened. So this problem was uncovered by one of our veteran prosecutors last year as she was preparing for trial. It came to her attention that there were text messages that would tend to support her explanation that evidence that drugs were planted, and so that again came to the attention of our prosecutor. She investigated it and believed that there was something suspicious, and brought it to the attention of the Conviction Integrity Unit. Well, upon looking into that particular confidential informant, we made an inquiry into law enforcement about whether or not this particular CI, as we called them, had been involved in other cases, and lo and behold, there was an incident where 3 different defendants were charged in a single incident, and the fact pattern was very similar, if not exact.
Okay, but is there another case outside of that you're saying
There
discovered as well?
Right, there is one situation where someone was on probation, and this particular CI was used to support a motion to revoke that defendant's probation. We have since discovered that, and we have made efforts to resolve that favorably for this defendant. And so, yes, we have taken care of that. But so far, as I say, it has only uncovered one. That's not to say there aren't more out there. Our CI unit is proactively looking for other cases. It's kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. But they are actively looking to see if there are other cases that we should uncover.
Are you looking outside of Bexar County? Do you know if he worked for any other law enforcement agencies, and if so, if you've reached out to them to inform them what happened here?
We don't have any information that he's done this in any other agency outside of Bexar County. I suppose it's possible, but right now all the information I have is that he worked with local agencies. Yeah.
So what specifically happened in that case? I mean, it wasn't like he was planting drugs in that case as well. What do we know what happened in that?
In the third case,
yes.
What happened is there was an allegation that individual committed what is called a new number 1, a new possession of a controlled substance. And that was based on information that this confidential informant provided. My understanding was that his testimony was used at the motion to revoke his probation hearing. And so it's that testimony that we're looking at about whether or not that is something that based the revocation, which I believe is what happened. I think the judge ultimately revoked that defendant's probation, and he was sent to prison. And so we're working with that defendant's lawyer in order to perfect a writ application and try and remedy that situation. Well, the reality is these kinds of events can happen. They've happened in the past. I mean, we all have heard about it. You see it on TV and in the movies. But what basically you have an individual that is motivated to engage in nefarious conduct. In this instance, we believe that this confidential informant did what he did because he was trying to work off his own cases. And so there was certainly an incentive for him to fabricate evidence, right? There was an incentive for him to set up other individuals in order to put him in a more favorable position with regard to his own cases. Let me tell you that use of confidential informants is very common in this country. They certainly have a role in the criminal justice system, but what we all have to do is ensure that if these informants are going to be used, that they are reliable, that their information is credible, and that there isn't anything illegal about their conduct.
It seems like there was a certain lack of oversight, at least over at the Sheriff's Department, who was using this guy in these cases. Where do you stand on how it happened with this particular informant? He was able to do all this without anybody knowing.
Well, you're right. They are a necessary evil. A lot of times cases are made because of the use of confidential informants. But again, everyone in the criminal justice system has to try and endeavor to make sure that the use of these informants is legitimate and that it is righteous. So when we all know about this, then it's a question of preventing this from happening. First of all, correcting the right and preventing this from happening in the future. So I think there has to be a lot of communication. First of all, I say all the time, there's a distinction between law enforcement and a prosecutor's office. We have to rely on the information and evidence that law enforcement agencies bring us. So when they bring us cases involving a confidential informant, we hope that they've gone through the steps of vetting this individual, and we hope that they bring us someone who is going to be truthful. But again, they're not always able to determine the truthfulness of an informant. So what we're doing in our office is trying to improve our training, trying to improve our review process to ensure that this kind of conduct doesn't happen in the future.
Yeah, has there been any sort of formal review after this case to kind of see how are we using informants? Should we be using them? Are there some reforms that we could initiate here to make sure this doesn't happen in the future?
Well, I'll tell you that we have initiated some reforms in our office. First of all, let me explain that what happened in these cases happened before the beginning of my administration. But now that we understand that this is a real problem and can be a real problem, we have initiated some reforms. For example, we have a more detailed review process where we vet confidential informants that are used on some of our cases. Before, in prior administrations, there was an investigator that was charged with reviewing and engaging in contracts with these informants. Now the process involves one of our division chiefs. So there are various levels of review, not only the investigator that's reviewing and accepting these informants and their applications or their contracts, but then we have the chief investigator reviewing that, and then finally a division chief that will sign off on these contracts and the use of these informants potentially for trial. In addition to that, we have also increased our training to make our prosecutors more aware of these kinds of issues at trial. We're trying to alert everybody in terms of the pitfalls that can come your way with the use of an informant. And so hopefully we are now educating as many people about the problems with regard to the use of confidential informants. I'm always in favor of whatever method or vehicle there is to be as transparent and as truthful as possible. So these reliability hearings that you speak of, sure, I'm in favor of that, but it would take, for example, we're advocates, right? We advocate one position. We believe that someone has committed a crime and an accused has a defense lawyer that represents him. So a lot of times it's up to the defense bar to raise that issue. And certainly I think it benefits everyone. It benefits the system when you can have those sorts of hearings and you can ferret out reliable versus unreliable witnesses, not only informants, but other sorts of witnesses. So sure, I think that's a good step.
Is there any sort of internal tracking here in Bexar County to see how these informants have done in the past? You know, this one has done pretty good for us. This one has led to wrongful convictions. You know, any sort of data collection to kind of see what the use of informants, how it, you know, works out here in Bexar County.
Well, there hasn't been any kind of tracking system historically. Before I came into office, there wasn't any kind of system or program where we could look and see, well, this particular CI has a bad record, so let's not use them in the past. So it's really a case-by-case situation. And again, this was brought to light, remember, just last year in 2020, but we certainly are going to be more aware of that, and we're going to focus on trying to prevent this sort of conduct from happening in the future. Well, that kind of information we have to keep internal in terms of the number of people that are under contract. But I will tell you again, we've improved the process. We begin with the fact that we have to rely on the information that is brought to us by law enforcement. We hope that the law enforcement agency itself, whether it's SAPD, Bexar County Sheriffs, or any other agency, would be only willing to sponsor informants that they believe to be truthful and to be credible. So that should be the first step. The second step is when they come in and meet with us, we have an investigator who reviews the contract, as well as his supervisor, our chief investigator, and as I mentioned before, a division chief. So there's several hands that will be reviewing the potential for a contract. Keep in mind that these confidential informants are not doing it a lot of times out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they're either trying to work off their own cases or for monetary gain. So there's already some built-in skepticism, right? There's some suspicion that are they doing what they're doing because they're trying to get some benefit for themselves. So we always have to be careful when we review these contracts and these applicants that the information, regardless of whether or not it benefits them, that this information is truthful. That's a very good question, but the answer is because sometimes it's necessary, because sometimes that's the only way that we can go after the bigger fish, as they say. And I'll tell you, when I was on the other side, I did a good amount of work as a defense lawyer, and the federal government does this quite often, and their goal is to try and get as high up the ladder, as we say, as possible. So in a situation like this, what you're trying to do is identify the bigger dealer, the person that's got the higher amount of drugs versus the casual user. And so it is part of law enforcement and it's part of prosecution. It is a necessary tool on the war on crime. If we're all about trying to go after the big-time drug dealer, sometimes the only way you get to the big-time drug dealer is by talking to the buyer so that you can get to the bigger fish. Well, that is still ongoing. We have encouraged the sheriff's office to bring us a case. And I'll tell you that when and if they do, we will look at it with a careful eye toward prosecution, because we do think that that is something that should be prosecuted. Because had our prosecutor not done the right thing and informed us of this, we would have had 3 or 4 people in prison sitting there that were truly innocent.
Right.
I do have some concerns, and that's why I have charged that unit with proactively looking at cases that involve confidential informants. Again, in the 2.5 years or so that I've been in office, I don't believe that this is a rampant problem in our office, but I certainly want to know whether or not there are people, even before I got here, people that were not on my watch that were sent to prison because based on informants that got on the stand and lied. And if that happens, then it's our obligation to correct that wrong. So absolutely, I'm concerned about it. That's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night, are people sitting in prison that don't belong in prison.
Yeah. Do you have concerns about the police work that was done in these cases, that the informant was able to get in there and plant evidence?
No, I don't. I mean, I think the police try and do a good job. They try and investigate these cases. But I think sometimes even law enforcement needs to take a step back and say, is this too good to be true? Is there something more here than meets the eye? And I think that's what happened in this situation is maybe in the zeal to make a case, they were willing to accept the information that was provided by this bad CI that turned out to be untruthful.